Alright, so we are back with another Power Rankings video. Obviously, it's been basically a full week since the race, so I am very delayed on releasing this one, and I actually managed to record a little short for the first time before even putting this out. So without further ado, let's kind of get into it, and we will talk about all of the things that happened, including these three over here. And if you don't already, please give me a follow on the social media below, especially I would say on Twitch and TikTok, where I do live stream some gaming content. So yeah, I would very much appreciate people being over there. All right, let's get into it. So we're gonna start at the bottom as we always do, and since it is another sprint weekend, we are going to be talking about all 20 drivers. We're not going to be exempting out Logan Sargent since he crashed in the main race. We're not going to be not talking about like Lance Stroll or Lando Norris since they crashed in the sprint quali. They all have sessions that we can be taking like recorded data from through. Granted, the practice session didn't really count for anything this weekend, but granted, through that, the multiple qualifying sessions, the multiple races, there was a lot of competitive action that was able to be analyzed. So, Magnussen, obviously, in my opinion, the worst driver of the weekend. Just simply put, there was a lot of expectations I had of Haas based off of the simple statistics of their car. They should have been way more competitive, but they simply were not there, like at all. Like at least Nico was somewhat there, but Kevin wasn't there like at all. He was just driving off track, getting into battles that he shouldn't be involved in. I don't blame him at all for that Logan Sargent crash. I think that one was Sargent's fault. But at the same time, like, even at that point, he was just not in good positions. He needs to be doing better than that. He's very well may lose his seat, even with Nico leaving the team and them bringing in Behrman probably to replace Nico. Magnussen absolutely is not doing a good job of him keeping his own seat, simply on wanting to stay level. And then the next group of drivers is the drivers we put in, like, they didn't really have good drives this weekend, which included, I think for the first time this season, Alonso. Yeah, he did decent in the main race and got himself at least in to get a couple points, but the expectations are a little bit higher than that, and he was just plain bad through the qualifying sessions and the sprint race. It was just a bad weekend for Alonso. He's set the bar high, and I think he was probably going to be disappointed in that himself. Lance Stroll, probably, he got taken out in the sprint race, of course, so we're not really holding that against him. But yeah, he was just there. I think I predicted him to be P11 in qualifying. I think that's where he finished. He finished very bad in the main race, and in the sprint race, yeah, he got taken out. I don't really even remember what else, if anything, happened with him. Yeah, no, Stroll was just kind of there. The two Sauber drivers, I can't even talk about. It's like straight up, I don't think I saw them on track this weekend. There was a little bit of with Zhou going on at one point. He was doing a fairly good job actually with the soft tires. Now that I think about it, he was doing decent. But Bottas, I don't think I saw on track once outside of the qualifying. I wouldn't call it an incident, but the qualifying, like, impeding event that he had with Oscar. That was it. Logan Sargent, he had himself a very good sprint, to be fair. Finished P11 there. He had himself a very good sprint. I think that's the one thing that really kind of ranked him up a little bit higher, because the rest of the weekend was bad. It was his fault that he took himself out. And as far as Alex goes, I think this is just a very, very, very bad weekend for him. Granted, I don't think the car was there for them this weekend. When I analyzed it, I think they had the worst car for this track. So I wasn't really expecting much from Williams, so I think he's kind of almost where you would expect him to be. I think the one thing that just raised Sargent up was his performance in the sprint race. Yeah. Next group of drivers. I've got Hulkenberg, Russell, Oscar, Esteban, Daniel, and Pierre. Now, Nico, obviously, he got at least a couple points out of the car, but I think it was like I was saying pre weekend. I think they had a good car for this track. It's just mediocre drivers. Like, I'm not trying to use mediocre as a bad phrase. It's just obviously it's not great. It's not fantastic. It's you're getting a couple points out of a driver who, like, in a car that you would expect that car to almost be there, but the driver's just not always there. He's not able to get the most out of that car. So I think Nico did himself a decent job. He basically did what was expected of him. Yeah, ultimately, I still think this is a bit of a letdown weekend for Haas. Nico just barely did ever so little bit of redeeming factors for them. Just, it wasn't a lot, but he at least did something. George, I just think Mercedes were not really there this weekend. Lewis at least had like a couple standout moments, but Mercedes are obviously right now like the fourth fastest car behind Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari. Yeah, I think P7, P8 is basically the target, and I think both of the drivers are kind of hitting that right now. It's just Russell kind of got outperformed by a few other drivers this weekend, in my opinion, than he should have. Like, he shouldn't be finishing behind Sonoda, in my opinion. He should be at least a little bit more competitive. And then Oscar, sprint race, sprint qualifying, great. Regular qualifying, great. First half of the Grand Prix, great. Second half of the Grand Prix, not so great. That's where he deeply fell off and absolutely ruined his race, in my opinion. I know Carlos is going to get a lot of the blame in that too, but at the same time, I think Piastri was just racing maybe a bit harder than he needed to be. Obviously, you got to try and hold the position, but I think that first time around when Carlos was like all the time, like, tell him to give me the position, like, etc. Absolutely, Oscar pushed him off of track, and Oscar should have gotten a penalty at that time. So I think before the incident that ended up breaking his wing, I think Oscar was already set to drop back in this race anyways, because I think, in my opinion, he should have taken that penalty. Esteban Ocon. This is actually probably a great weekend for him. I'm kind of surprised that my analytics put him only at 11. I thought it would have maybe put him at least P9 or P10. Simply because you got a point with an Alpine. That's incredible, because that car is awful. Granted, it's starting to look a little bit better now that they're kind of at the weight limits of what they're supposed to be, but I think they were doing a little better. Of course, Ocon, I think he got a bit of luck to him in the main race with the virtual safety car, because I know before that some of the other drivers had boxed, and that allowed him, for example, to get in front of his teammate, because before that point, Gasly was looking like the lead Alpine driver. But good on Ocon. Yes, absolutely, there's always the what if factors, but Ocon made it work. That's what he did, and I can't fault him at all for it. Daniel Ricciardo. It's a tale of two stories in this one weekend for him. He had, of course, the sprint qualifying and the sprint race. Amazing. Holy crap, that would be like, yes, that is worthy of getting you a Red Bull seat. That kind of drive. And then he had the kind of qualifying after that where it's like, we're starting to see why people are saying you might not be around next year. Like, he obviously has that level to him. He just needs to find that consistency. He was great at China. He was great for the sprint of this race. And then he just completely fell off for the second qualifying and this race. Granted, I think RB kind of screwed him a little bit with the strategy in the Grand Prix. I think it was an awful strategy that they put him on. Like, they had moments where they could have boxed him. I think under that VSC was potentially an option, and they just left him out. And it's like, yeah. I think he was mismanaged during the main race, definitely, but when you put all of the numbers together, he still had himself a good weekend. Well, I'd say a decent weekend. He finally got himself some points. I think that is enough. He'll probably, hopefully, take some confidence out of. And I think I think Imola is one of the tracks he's done decently at before, so I'm kind of hoping for another result out of him. And then Pierre Gasly. Once again, similar to Ocon, the expectations out of that car were very low. So for him to be climbing and looking competitive, it was looking like he could be competing for an outside shot at points during that race. But then he got a little bit of the bad luck, and again, we're talking about the what if factors. But it was a little bit of bad luck. I think he had himself a very good weekend, at least as far as Alpine goes. Yeah. Next group of drivers. So for the first time, we do not have Verstappen at the top of the chart while he's been charted, because obviously we didn't chart him at Australia since his brake issue. Yeah, not Verstappen's best weekend. I don't think he really had noted problems. I've heard some people saying he had was losing like 2 tenths per lap or something like that after the incident with what is it, hitting the pylon. I know that's not the right word, but I'm gonna call it a pylon. Yeah. After he hit that, I heard some people saying, "Oh, he did probably have some damage." It didn't really look it. I just think he wasn't on his pace today. Most of the time, the car was still able to factor it, such as the sprint qualifying. When afterward he was just like, "Lol," like this just wasn't his best weekend, and there's nothing wrong with that. This was still a great, great, great drive for him. I think he did everything that he was supposed to do. It's just it wasn't that championship level drive that you expect out of Max Verstappen. And then Carlos Sainz, pretty good weekend, was basically just getting outperformed by his teammate quite solidly, and both of the McLarens, which the argument can be made that they could be behind the McLarens, but the argument could also be made that they should be in front of the McLarens. It's really depending on who you're asking, what data you're looking at. But I still think this was an overall great weekend for Carlos. Nothing really too much to complain about, except for maybe, of course, that penalty for the incident with Piastri. Yuki, fantastic weekend. Absolutely fantastic weekend. If he put up the kind of performance in qualifying that he did during both the sprint and main race, he could have scored even more. Absolutely fantastic weekend. That is the kind of weekend you need to have to be getting considered for Red Bull. And then Sergio Perez. This is once again one of just it's still a great weekend, but not great for Red Bull in my opinion. It's just yeah, he's doing a good job. He's a great, fantastic driver. It's just not good enough even for that second seat in Red Bull. He should be at the very least, like being competitive with the Ferraris and the McLarens. He should absolutely be battling for a podium in that main race, and he just simply was not there. And he almost took out 3 drivers on turn 1. That was crazy. I legit yelled. If you were here for my live stream, which, yes, I do live stream some of the races. I'll do a couple watch-alongs and put up some data sheets here. I yelled so loud at that. That was crazy. Yeah. That was a mid-level weekend for Perez, which happens to just still be great because they're still getting points on a regular basis. And then this is where I'll probably get a little bit of a controversial ranking at the top, because I do not have Lando Norris as the top driver of the weekend. Driver of the day? Absolutely. But top driver of the weekend? No. That goes to Charles Leclerc this weekend. I simply think he was getting the most out of that car, because while the arguments can be made for both sides, like I was mentioning earlier, the McLaren Ferrari situation, in my opinion, based off of data, Red Bull had the best car by far and away. Second best car was McLaren after I reanalyzed things before the race. And for Charles to be out-qualifying Checo, to be out-qualifying Carlos by a decent margin, to be out-qualifying both McLarens, both races, finish P2 in the sprint race, and then finish still ahead of Carlos, I said Carlos twice, ahead of Carlos and Checo in the main race as well. And then also, of course, Piastri. I think Charles had the most consistent weekend, is what I want to say. There was a couple times when I felt Lando should have been better. I'm looking basically at the qualifying sessions because I can't really judge his sprint race since he got taken out. But I think Lando could have basically done a little bit better there. That's probably the one thing that why he's not number one in my ranking for this weekend is probably just his qualifying and the fact that during the main race, like even he himself said, he didn't overtake anyone. Absolutely, he got a little bit of luck, and absolutely, he did make it work. That was great. That was on him. But I just don't think he was consistently the best driver of the weekend. I think that would be Charles. If you had put Charles in a Red Bull car, I think Charles would have won this weekend. That's just my opinion. Anyways, we'll go into my weekly awards. We'll talk about our drivers of the day, the best recovery drives, over-delivered, under-delivered, etc. So the drivers that I've put in these 5 categories. So driver of the day, obviously it's Lando Norris. You get that win and his first win, everyone is happy. Like, absolutely every single person was overwhelmed with joy. Worst driver of the day, Logan Sargent. He took himself out of that race. That accident was his fault. Kevin Magnussen had the run. He had the deserved amount of car on the inside to earn himself some space. Absolutely. Best recovery drive, Esteban Ocon. I think he had not a great start to the race, was getting outraced by his teammate and was just kind of around what I want to say P13, P14. Got a little bit of luck going his way and he made the best of it. The driver that over-delivered this weekend, Yuki Tsunoda. Holy crap, was Yuki's pace amazing during both of those races. He just did absolutely everything he could. He over-delivered on that car even more than Daniel did. It's crazy that Daniel finished P4 in a race. It sucks that it was a sprint and not the main race, but Yuki was just so good. And then, of course, the driver that under-delivered, Kevin Magnussen, because they have a competitive car right now, but mediocre drivers, and Kevin was just straight up a bad driver this weekend. Plain and through. I was debating whether to put Kevin in my worst driver of the day, but it was you know what? Kevin didn't crash the car. I mean, kind of he did, but in my opinion, Logan crashed the car, not Kevin. So I don't want to fault Kevin for that one. That one should be Logan. And then we'll look, of course, at my pre-weekend qualifying predictions. We thought we would have a Red Bull lockout, followed by Lando in P3. So even pre-weekend, I thought Lando would be competing for at least a podium. And Charles, Carlos, Oscar, Fernando, George, Hamilton, and Hulkenberg. So I did expect at least an attempt for a point out of one of the Haas drivers. At least they got something during the sprint. Yeah, he finished P7 during the sprint, I want to say. And yeah, then as far as the actual qualifying went, Charles was fantastic, Carlos was fantastic, Checo was nowhere. Lando had himself probably a little bit of a bad performance in qualifying as far as their car goes. Russell and Hamilton each did a little bit better. Same goes for Hulk. Tsunoda did way better than expected in the main qualifying. Stroll, right where we expected. Both of the Alpines, way better than expected. I think they are the kind of maybe also the other drivers who you could put for over delivered, but I got to give credit to Ocon for that recovery drive and getting that point. I was torn basically whether to put Ocon there or Tsunoda, but I felt like either driver could have gone in either of those categories. Alex, basically kind of where he was expected to. Alonso, big disappointed in his qualifying. Bottas, right where he expected. Sargent actually had himself finally a decent qualifying session. Ricardo, that was bad. We expected a lot better. Kevin, we expected way much better than that from Kevin. So that was a very, very bad qualifying session. And then Joe, so that's got to be a little bit disappointing at the back. I know they are probably the second worst car on the grid right now, at least for that track. But to be P20 is just always so disappointing. And then my pre-weekend race prediction, It's fairly similar results, actually. I think, trying to think of what I had really different. I think I just swapped around Hamilton and Hulkenberg but in my qualifying. I think Ricardo and Sonoda I had swapped. And then I think that was it, really. Of course, I had Logan Sargent down here in P20, but since he didn't finish the race, I'm taking him out of this factor. And then we have our actual race finish. This is probably where I've been the most off all year so far. Of course, Lando won. I thought he would be on the podium. I didn't expect him to do that good. Charles, he finished on the podium. I wasn't expecting him to. Checo, down a couple spots. Max, down one spot. Sainz finished exactly where we expected, but he could have been better without that penalty. Checo technically did even worse. Lewis had himself a great race. Yuki had himself a fantastic race. George, you would have expected more out of him. Fernando, he had himself a good recovery drive. Actually, he probably could have been eligible for that award, but at the same time, it's still such a bad weekend from him. It would be kind of tough to give him that one. So good recovery drive from Alonso, but still kind of finishing worse than where he should be. I feel like if we had swapped Alonso and Sonoda here, that would have been a lot more as expected. Esteban Ocon, fantastic race, doing way better than I expected of him. Nico, that's a pretty disappointing result in my opinion. I expected the Haas's to, he should be above Esteban 1,000% in my opinion. Pierre Gasly, solid race. Got a little bit shafted, a bit of luck, bit of timing, but that's racing. Oscar, that was a bad second half of the race. What was after an amazing start to the race. So yeah, I hope he can turn it around. He absolutely should turn it around, but he's looking like a number 2 driver right now. He's not looking like that up and coming superstar that everyone's expecting him to be. He looks like he's developing into someone like how Bottas was at Mercedes, where it's like a fantastic secondary driver, absolutely a fantastic secondary driver, but maybe not more than that. Maybe a lead driver at like a middle of the pack team, but he needs to take another step in my opinion. Zhou, yeah, did pretty decent in the race, I gotta say, especially once he got those soft tires. Daniel, yeah, he finished below expectations on that race. Not far off, not enough to be like it was a bad weekend for him, because, well, he still had that other half of the weekend that was amazing. Valtteri, I didn't even notice him in the race, pure straight up. Lance Stroll, I didn't see him actually in the Grand Prix as well, but to finish down in P17 in an Aston Martin, that is a bad race. Alex, they've got the worst car on the grid for Miami, so I wouldn't really expect too much more, but he's a really good driver. I would expect him just on that to be a little bit more competitive. And then Kevin was just absolutely awful. Absolutely freaking awful. There's no redeeming any of what happened with Kevin this weekend outside of the fact that he should not have taken at least one of those penalties that he did for the collision with Sargent, because that one to me is on Sargent. And yeah, as far as my predictions go, this has been my worst result so far at a 31.5. So yeah, not a very, very good result. The best result I've had so far was the very first one I've done, and then it's been like almost downhill since. Of course, we got Imola coming up, so we'll probably be releasing another video in about half a week from now. I want to try and release it on the Thursday or the Wednesday before the race, but we'll see. We'll see how I feel come during the week. And yeah, let me know, what do you think of my rankings? Where am I way off? Who would you put higher, lower, or any of those? Is any of my information just completely dead wrong? Let me know your opinions, and thank you very much for watching. I hope to see people around regularly.